So to give folks a little bit of a background on the Yellowstone Conference and where this came from, YBGR has been doing this 4 years. We originally started based upon Georgetown's LEAD conference model, which it's an interactive conference. It's really meant to be a chance for people to get engaged and for us to come up with an action plan, not just a talking head type of conference. So as we get through this process, you'll have a chance to ask questions and hopefully have a chance to move forward with a plan. Again, my name's Mike Shavers. I'm the CEO here at Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch. This panel is on our Collaborating for Outcomes panel on the Family First Act. And just as a quick overview of what the Family First Act is, the Family First Act was passed in 2018 by Congress, and the goal was to change foster care as we know it. Primarily, they look to keep kids in their home and to reduce out-of-home placements whenever possible, and also to reduce unnecessary use of residential treatment programs and group homes. And then lastly, they wanted to build the capacity of communities in order to support children and families more effectively. It's required a couple of changes and impacts in our system. And many of those impacts have happened on, or will be happening on the state side with Child Protective Services and other entities there, but also on the provider side. It's created a new level of care called Qualified Residential Treatment Programs and new standards that go along with that. It requires the child protective systems and providers to engage with the judicial system in a different way. And it's requiring us to increase our community and wraparound services to those children in the homes. As we move through the panel here, each panelist will have a few minutes to present what they see as challenges or opportunities with Family First Act. After we get through with that, you'll have a chance to ask those panelists questions. I'll go through how you do that in just a couple of minutes after we get through the panelists, so people have it kind of top of mind at that point. But our first panelist, and I do need to pass along apologies. We're supposed to have 4 panelists today. Denise Johnson from the Montana Child Protection Alliance was meant to join us, and Denise has been had some family issues come up, and she's in our thoughts. So she won't be here today, but we do have Dennis Sulzer. Dennis is the CEO of YDI here in Billings and really provides services across the state. Dennis has been a great partner with Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch and brought his experience with education and kids into this role as CEO of YDI. And so Dennis, we appreciate your expertise in being a part of this. Why don't you go ahead and I'll give you the floor for a moment.
Well, thanks, Mike. I don't know if you all can see Mike or not, but he looks a bit like a DJ, a radio host. And I was just going to say, Mike, my face is probably better on radio than what you're all seeing now. But anyway, thanks for allowing us, all of us, to be part of this. I know the other panelists, we've spent a lot of time together over the last year and a half or so, considering Family First and the Family First Act and the effects it will have on us as an agency and us as deliverers of service throughout the state of Montana. But I liken it to, Family First says it all, that, families are first and they're most important in the formation of young people. We all know that parents are the most important influence on their children, and to maintain that family unit is the ultimate goal of the Family First Act. And you said it already, but as on a personal note, we always like to try to make things personal to us, and take a close look at our own lives and what our best reference for family was the family that we were raised and born in. And I was lucky enough to have 2 educators as parents, as my bio stated, and then I had 5 siblings. There are 5 of us that grew up together, and gosh, we had a wonderful family life. that's the best start that any child could ask for. And, that's what we all aspire for. But those of us working in social services and education over most of our lives realize that that's not always the case. And families need help. They aren't always perfectly functioning, even in the best families. We kid ourselves about what some of the stuff our dad came up with and put us through. But, we knew he was loving and caring, and ultimately that won out all of the challenges that we had. But the reality is some families are in trauma, and children experience that. So the most successful families are really connected. It's a biological connection and natural. And obviously that's what we want for all the children that we deal with. The sense and feeling of permanency, that's something that a child can count on. And that's what we're trying to create as agencies across the state, that permanency and being able to count on something for children that they trust, they understand that there's support and commitment, and that trauma isn't present every day, and they can deal with the trauma that they have experienced over time. So overcoming trauma and bad situations and bad people and creating hope. That's what Family First is all about. And I know that Nikki, she's shaking her head like this, and I know that is the ultimate goal of her department is, establishing trusting relationships and creating hope for children. So, that's ultimately where we're at. I could go through all of the services that we at Youth Dynamics provide, and we have several of them, and I have them listed, but for the sake of time, I won't list them all. But I think that all of the services we provide are connected and potentially needed as wraparound for our children that we do serve. And I think that it's an important part of who we are as agencies across the state, that some of us do, for example, case management better than others. Some of us provide QRTP or that potential QRTP placement better than others. Some of us provide foster care better than others, and transitional living skills and all of those things. And then some of us provide home support services better than others. My point is we all have the potential of supporting the children throughout the state in kind of a wraparound performance or program, as you mentioned earlier, Mike, that wraparound services can really have an impact on a child and a family situation. But the reality is we must rely on each other. When I came to this organization, there was some bit of siloing, even residential and community, and we felt like breaking down those silos within our organization are important. But now more than ever, we truly believe that breaking down silos across agencies within the state of Montana is really important, especially if Family First is going to succeed. So I think we have two challenges. One is internally to do the very best job of providing scientific research-based programs like the ARC model of care, which we are really studying closely as an agency, and that might be a challenge for us to become kind of ARC model cultured as we venture into Family First. But the more important challenge, I think, is breaking out of our silos as an agency and working even more close with family and Child and Protective Services Division, along with YBGR, along with the other programs throughout the state, and calling on each other's strengths to support that child and family that need us if we truly are going to address the principles of the Family First Act. So that's my perspective. It's our agency's perspective. Over the last year and a half, we really see a blending and a growth. And I would like to say thank you to you, Mike, as a leader in the state at Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch in calling agencies together, really asking them to put forth an effort collectively for the children and calling on each other's strengths, where we can refer to one another and also consult with one another and actually serve children and families collectively. I think that's going to make a huge difference in us being successful as a state and following the principles and ideals of the Family First Act. So that's all I need to say. I'll turn it over to the next panelist, and I think, Nikki, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. Nikki Grossberg is the Deputy Division Administrator for Child and Family Services Division. And Nikki has been leading the Family First Prevention Act implementation in the state of Montana, leading the team that's done that. So she's been a great partner with agency and providers out there, and is probably one of the state's experts on where it is right now in the state of Montana. So Nikki, we'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. I would echo a lot of what Dennis said about what we want for families, but also I think one of the things that have happened under Families First is this collaboration between our agency, different divisions across DPHHS and with providers, which has been kind of an excellent experience for us to have. I think from my perspective and from Child and Family Services perspective, the Act has really created has created an opportunity for the child welfare, child protection system to get further upstream and really start talking about prevention and implementing prevention, even if it is tertiary prevention with families. And so to have this conversation in the child welfare system start and will continue moving forward, I think has been significantly beneficial. I really believe that social workers get into the field of child welfare, child protection to really prevent harm to children. And this act has begun to align funding with what our true desires are, is really to prevent that harm to children and to help families be safe and healthy. The intent of Families First obviously also supports the new direction of the administration for child and family services, or for child and families at the national level, which is really about moving a child protection system to one of a child and family well-being system. And I think that's one thing that I've really noticed with our providers and our collaboration is folks really understand that children do best when, if at all possible, in their own homes and with their own families. And how do we develop a system and services that allow for that? I think one challenge that that we have to address is really the perception of Child and Family Services Division. I think in many communities, we're seen as our only resources when we remove a child and place them in foster care, and which is not accurate. We do a lot of prevention work and have historically, but that really wanting families to engage with us on a voluntary level to do the prevention work, I think is going to be a lift for our agency and for the communities and for the families to recognize that we truly do want to keep families together if at all possible. I think the other significant component that Mike talked about within Families First is that reducing the use of congregate care. What it has done, in my opinion, in Montana has really given us an opportunity to assess what we're doing well and where we need to improve. I've been so impressed and happy with the way the providers have come to the table with our agency and with Children's Mental Health Bureau to really look at what's working, what's not working, and how do we make those improvements. I think we do a lot of things well. Our therapeutic group homes, our other congregate care providers in Montana, I think we do a lot of things well. But I think probably the thing I'm most excited about is that really working on improving the discharge planning and aftercare services. I think with the rural nature of Montana, part of that challenge will be really kind of linking the planning and the service delivery between communities. So if a child's in a group home in Billings, but the family that they're returning to is in Libby, how do we coordinate services and communication, not only between providers, but also ensure that we have the services available in some of our smaller rural communities. And I would agree with what Dennis has said. Mike and a variety of providers have done a great job coming to the table and really identifying how do we take down those silos and the barriers to really work together. A next step within reducing that use of congregate care is really enhancing our foster care family system. So the therapeutic foster care providers that exist in Montana, how do we do therapeutic foster care even better, and regular foster care, and add the supports into the foster care system so that kids have a home-like setting to reside in, regardless of their behaviors. And so that, I think, will be a next step for our agency, and hopefully along with providers as we continue our implementation of Families First. And then I would just close with saying how appreciative I have been for the provider community to really come to the table and work with us and really think about how we improve the outcomes for kids and families. So thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Nikki. Then our third panelist today will be Jeff Folsom. Jeff has a wealth of experience both on the provider side and then on the university side in supporting the state systems. And he's been a great advocate for kids and brings a wealth of knowledge and some unique ways of thinking about these problems. So Jeff, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me back again. I appreciate being at your conference each year, and it's really been a great conference. And even in this setting, and as we're all learning to adapt to virtual kind of uses to draw the folks that you have today is a testament to the good work that you're doing and the good conversations that we've had around this conference. So thanks for having me here. I'm going to repeat some probably of what you've heard already, but I want to really drill into today. And Nikki mentioned kind of the commitment to well-being and family well-being. And we're just hearing now out of the Administration for Children and Families, they're partnering with Casey Foundation and others, Annie Casey and others, to really kind of announce that voice and to say, what this is about is commitment to well-being and elevating the voices of parents and youth and people with lived experience and learning more. And I think the center, I think the fundamental piece of Family First, and Dennis said this in its name, is family, and is listening to families and is looking at our relationships with families. And we use a lot of words around that. We talk about family engagement. We talk about family voice. We talk about well-being. We talk about prevention services. We talk about getting in earlier. We talk about having a good year. And as I was preparing for today, I was thinking about a few things. And one of the pieces that we've been working on at the university is an effort that we've been calling Family Voice Curious. And Family Voice Curious is at risk of just being yet another word and another way of describing the same thing. But where we started was this idea of in relationship and building relationships, what are the foundational pieces and how do we continue to break it down to wherever we're interacting, whether it's a first time interaction between a child and family service worker or with the court systems with the family, or it's an entry into a QRTP or a group home of a family, or the first time they walk into an office of a physician or a mental health practitioner of any kind. What are some of the fundamental pieces that draws us to relationship and draws us to others? And it struck us, and it struck those that I was talking with this about, that we jump to engagement. And engagement is actually pretty strong. Engagement, to be engaged and to really be connected, which is kind of what engagement connotes, takes time and takes relationship building. And we tried to break that down and talked really about the idea of curiosity and kind of cultural humility and really wanting to understand and feel and know what the other's experience is. So what we mean by Family Voice Curious really is intentionally working side by side with the families that we serve, really listening to them. And as I say this, we want to do that with authenticity. We want to do that with respect. We truly want to be collaborating. We want to be transparent, adaptable. And as I say all of these words, and I don't know how this will work in this format, but I didn't know if I would be having a panel of little heads that I'd be looking at today, or we'd just be looking at ourselves. But I'm going to try this anyway. So I'm assuming some of you have a pencil and paper in front of you, or you could do this in your heads or do this not at all. But I'm just going to throw out some of these words that we're talking about. So when we talk about elevating voices, when you hear the word voice, and I'll tell you, I played with this with the thesaurus on Word, and you could, if you have a computer and want to do that, feel free. But what's the first word you write down as a synonym? A synonym. I have trouble with that word too, voice. And just do that if you want and take a second. And then if some of you might have written down a word like attitude or opinion, or some of you might have been very literal and connoted sound. And then take whatever word and then do that a couple of times. Click down a couple of times. So if, let's say you came up with the word opinion, what would be your synonym for opinion? I'm going to do this with a few words. And so now let's jump from voice to listening and start with the word listening. And what's a synonym for listening? What do we mean when we say listening? And then what you put next, maybe you put paying attention, maybe you put joining, maybe you put responsive, whatever you might have put. Then get another synonym. Go 2 or 3 deep. And take a minute to go 2 or 3 deep. And just quickly, just off the top of your head, where do you go? Now think of the word engaging. Another one we keep throwing around, right? We're talking about family voice. We talk about listening to families. What about family engagement or the word engaging? What words come to your mind for that? Likeable, amenable, kind. What is engaging? What do we mean? And I know I'm moving kind of fast, but now write down the word curious. As I introduced the idea of family voice curious and throwing those words together. What is curious? Interested? Attracted? When we join new relationships and we are with others, as we are with many, if not all of the families that we serve, although we certainly see repeat families that come back to us in a new space and a new time, and we need to take them where they're at again. But mostly it's new each time. And to be curious and to really pay attention to where they are and where they're at is really a cultural piece for us and is a shift for us. One of the things that I noted, and I played with these words for a while, and I just kind of unfairly threw these at you quickly. But if you go back and just follow it, and I just used word and right-clicked on and hit synonym and did it again and again. And of course, I had to choose a word each time, which moved me, and I was making choices, and I had like 5 or 10 to choose from. I very clearly could purposefully almost send down 2 different paths. So that voice, I could go down a path of synonyms that turned into opinion, assertiveness, speaking out in very positive kind of a way. But I also very quickly could go down the path of judgment, attitude, arrogance, insolence. And it was all through the same string. It was all very quickly where that word took me. Listening took me down a path of paying attention, joining, connecting, being with. But it also took me down a path of just appearing and being present. And ultimately, one more step from that, in attendance. How many families have we listened to who we've said, oh, I listened, and the family really had the experience of we were in attendance. That's a different thing, right? How many families have given us their opinion and we've heard their voice, but we've walked away thinking they were a little insolent, as opposed to really asserting what they thought their family needed. Engaging, same thing, right? I found very quickly I could go down likable, nice, agreeable, amenable, friendly, and that quickly turned into pliable, acquiescent, doing what I want. Engaging is getting what I want. Now, certainly we're all in positions in many times where people aren't necessarily getting what they want, and it doesn't mean we're not engaged. But I could also follow that path down: likable, pleasing, friendly, kindly, respectful, responsive. Responsive is different than acquiescent. How we take that word engaging and what it means to us, any of us could end up on paths down either of those ways. Curious, unsurprisingly, the same thing. I could go down the path of being attracted. I could go down that if they were curious, they're paying attention, they're being respectful, and giving of themselves becomes a synonym in that track. But I could also see curiosity as concerned, distressed, alarmed, and I could turn it into a different pathway. We approach many of these families, and it's one of the more difficult times of their lives. Whether I show up as a child welfare worker, or they appear in my residential treatment program, in my court setting, or whatever those of us that are the part of the 60 of us gathered today, it's a very stressful time for them. It's very easy for us to start at this part of, we're going to be engaging, we're going to be curious, we're going to be listening, we're going to give them voice. But to quickly, because of our roles and the functions and the pressures that we're under and they're under, to not find ourselves 1, 2, 3 clicks away down the path that we've never intended to go. So I think when we talk about family first and outcomes, no matter which piece of the act we're talking about, which part of implementation, which part of the state, whatever place you play in that role in that system, if we're going to have good outcomes in family first, what we're talking about is a cultural change about family voice. And we're talking about a cultural change about the role of families. We know that when a child comes into the foster care system, into a group home, into residential care, that involving and being connected closely and really listening and being curious and engaging and giving voice to families is an unnatural act. I would really go as far as saying it's not natural. We're rescuing kids. We recognize they're here for a reason. They've coming from families that have sometimes little to no capacity for their care or well-being. They may be incarcerated. There may be drugs and alcohol involved. Kids may be abandoned. There could be extreme neglect or abuse. We may be on this path of terminating parental rights. It's really hard to take and still then be on a positive path and to give them voice that's seen as a good opinion and valuable and not insolent, because we're predisposed and we have these judgments that we bring. To really listen and to join and connect with them, even though they're coming from a very difficult space, versus checking the box of attending and being there because we know we're supposed to, and we have to check that box because it's what our job requires. To truly be responsive, not acquiescent. We're not going to be acquiescent to someone who brings these challenges to these kids and these families. But we still need to be curious in a giving way, and we need to be curious and not lead to more distress and bring more distress that just alienates and separates us from these families. So I think it's those cultural pieces that's transformative, and whatever aspect of family first we're talking about, I think the outcomes are going to require us to bring those best practices to better listen to and work with those families. In closing, I guess I would add just one more piece. We all know, and it's sometimes not even the outliers, many families that we work with are not going to be the place, are not going to be, as Dennis and Nikki both talked about, permanency placements for these kids. And when we talk about family and we talk about permanency, we also have to be talking about helping search for and find who and what family means for some of these kids. So as I express these ideas and as we continue to talk about pushing family voice forward and listening and connecting and engaging and working with families, for some of our kids, it's about searching out a new web of belonging. And it's about finding a new, what we might call fictive kin, or people who functioned in the place of family for these kids, and helping them get that. And in those cases, I think we have as equal a duty to work hard to find that voice for them and to find that web of belonging and bring some power to that group for the children we're serving as well. So with that, I know we want to leave plenty of time for questions, and I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it. And you always do bring a unique perspective. Now is the chance for our participants out there to get involved. I'll throw out a question to the panelists right now, so maybe we can get this ball rolling a little bit. One of the more detailed aspects of Family First Act has to do with its requirement of us shifting towards more evidence-based practices. And, we all know that those are great things, but they can be both expensive and time consuming and sometimes a lot of work. I'm wondering if you guys have any strategies or any thoughts about how we're going to overcome some of those barriers, or how we could work together more effectively to do that. Any thoughts that you guys have about where we're at with evidence-based practices and how we can embrace that more effectively as part of Family First Act? Whoever would like to answer, I'm willing to hear.
Yeah, so Mike, I had mentioned that in my presentation, so I'll start off, and if anybody else wants to add to it. We have been challenged by that. Our model that we've been using within our residential programs is Common Sense Parenting, which is an evidence-based program, and it works, but we feel like there's some shortcomings, and not the entire perspective of family is really truly understood. And that model doesn't always work in our community programming. That's why we've been moving towards the attachment regulation and competency model, and really moving in that direction. But yes, as you said, it's costly. We just feel like to implement and get started, we feel like it is entirely worth the investment, given its research-based, evidence-based effectiveness. And we need to move in that direction as an agency, and not only within our residential programming, but our community-based programming as well. We see it as a tie for our workers, and to help unsilo things as well, that we sometimes get into in the residential versus community-based programming. It ties things together for us, and it's a model that both major programs that we deliver and our services throughout, whether it's residential or community programming, that it ties things together for us. And we're speaking one common language then within our agency. So whether it's upfront costs or ongoing training and continuing to educate, we feel that is necessary to make it part of our culture. And an evidence-based program that is part of our culture will be that much more powerful, and it'll help us interact with one another as well. So we see that as our challenge, but we're moving in that direction, and we have a plan to implement.
So I can add a couple things from my perspective. I think a couple of things. I do think the evidence-based models and the data and research components of Families First and evaluation is exciting for child welfare, but it's new. We think of all the different industries out there, and evaluation and evidence-based models, and really looking at what we are doing, is that impacting positive outcomes for families, is a pretty new process for child welfare in the context of overall looking. And so really wanting to approach it in a process-oriented, sensible way that, it will understand that it's going to take time and steps and some trial and error as we continue to grow. But really, I guess what excites me about that is that my hope is that we quit having the pendulum swing from one side to the other within child welfare. Like, we should do this. This is going to make, everything better. And then all of a sudden we swing back the other way. And so I do think using evidence-based models and really being data-driven will be a positive thing. I also think under Director Hogan at DPHHS, she's really led the way in looking, kind of forcing the different divisions under DPHHS to look at different ways, different funding streams, how to blend funding streams, how to create systems that are sustainable. And I think that will continue we'll continue to take those steps as we move forward to see what we can do to help and support providers as we move, as we use more and more evidence-based models that can be expensive, and not only to implement, but then to maintain. Turnover, as you guys know, I'm sure as much as we do, turnover within these fields can be really costly. When you train someone up in an evidence-based model and then they move on to be a private practice therapist or they move on to a different organization. And so recognizing how do we create sustainability, I think is definitely a focus we have too.
Great, thanks, Nikki. Jeff?
Mike, can I take a quick whack at that too? Just to have
please.
a different perspective is you know, I think we've kind of backed ourselves into an outcomes corner in human services because we have not done a very good job of demonstrating outcomes that we've suggested. So, for example, we've spent tens of millions or hundreds or billions of dollars nationally, but we've spent tremendous amount of money on developing a community-based system of care for children over the last 20 years, all with the promise of reducing foster care, reducing foster care drift, reducing group home care, reducing community care, and we haven't done that. The outcomes, the population health outcomes have showed those have increased. And so we've shifted into this idea of evidence-based practices. And it's the notion of evidence-based practices is that, well, if we have a well-supported evidence-based practice and we have fidelity to it, then we're going to have the outcomes without having to measure them because the researchers tell us that we will. And at least that will be the case. So, you know, I think we have a duty and a responsibility to do stuff that works. And I think whether at any level, at any part of the system, I don't know that evidence-based practice is going to get there. I agree with Nikki that, well, I think she was hoping it wouldn't, but the pendulum will swing. Of course it will. Unfortunately, we know that just to be true. Fidelity is going to be impossible. I mean, I'll just say that flat out. I don't believe once you get something out of the lab, out of the research, out of the university, into the field, it maintains fidelity. It doesn't mean it doesn't work. The example I often use is cognitive-based therapy, which in the lab, you know, is probably the most researched, the most evidence-based, well-supported practice in mental health and human services that we have. I would challenge that less than 1% of practitioners of cognitive-based therapy are performing it with fidelity to the way it was done in the research labs as it was designed. Which means that you aren't getting the outcome based on that. Instead, what we're doing is what I like the phrase I've learned along the way of practice-based evidence, that we're practicing based on evidence that things are getting better. And so I think while we go down this path of evidence-based practice and I think we've been pushed into that, we still got to remember to figure out what works and to keep track of what works. And if something's promising and not quite supported through all of the evidence, and it works in our jurisdiction, it works in a rural community, it works in our town, it works because of my style or my agency style, that we shouldn't shy away from that.
Thanks, Jeff. Questions are starting to come in here, and we have several really good questions out there. But the one with the highest votes right now says, are there any practices being added, promoted in the state and therapeutic foster care settings that are increasing the ability of a family to have visits on a regular and more frequent basis, more than an hour a week, including family that's not just parents, siblings, aunts, grandparents, etc.? Anybody want to? Nikki, that sounds like a question for you.
Yep, I'll start with that. So visitation is, as we all know, is significant. It's very important for kids reuniting with families, with their parents. And so really have put a focus on increasing visitation and increasing quality of visitation. And so through our prevention and support services contracts have been doing some, have brought in a provider to do visit coaching and really teach providers around how do we coach parent-child visits and not just, you know, sit and watch, but really help parents build skills while they're having that visitation time. In addition, really focusing on not all children and family members, whether parents or grandparents or those pieces, need a supervised setting. Oftentimes you can create, you know, look for other settings or other opportunities where kids can have time with their family and different family members, that it doesn't have to just be supervised. So I've really worked with providers and staff around how to create those opportunities and use natural resources, natural supports for visitation time. And then also really trying to work with, through that visit coaching, have also created some incentives for providers to do visits in the home and to do the visit coaching versus just kind of that monitoring visit. So absolutely important and something that we continue to work on and try to grow and improve on.
I just echo that at Youth Dynamics, our family visitation program has grown exponentially in the last year and a half. So there is a need, there's no doubt about that. And we're seeing it within our organization. I really like what Nikki has to say about the variety or different delivery models of visitation, which I think there's a need for. You know, every family and every situation is different, and there is a need for different ways to do that. So we're basically designed on one model that is supervised with some family coaching that takes place, but within the home, it's even more powerful.
If I was a payer, I would mandate it. And if I was a provider, I would cringe at that.
Yeah. Just little follow-up thread to this question, and I think this, Nikki, is probably for you as well. What's the current process for releasing a child to a family member outside of the state if there's an appropriate home option? It's a pretty specific one. I don't know if you'd know the answer to that.
So, and hopefully they'll follow up with more questions if I'm not getting at it, but I do feel like what they're talking about is our Interstate Compact Act and our ability to have kids reside in other states if we have care and control of them. So if we have a legal case available or a legal case with that family and we have temporary legal custody of the child, we have to have an approved ICP. Acronym. As you guys all know, child welfare uses lots of acronyms. And so the Interstate Compact Act has to, through that process, the home in the other state has to be approved. And so it is, there's a process to that around kids residing in different states when Montana, when they're part of the Montana foster care system.
Thank you. So another question, it isn't receiving all the votes, but I think it's an important one we didn't really touch on earlier. There's a question out there about how does the Indian Child Welfare Act fit into the Families First Act? And maybe a brief overview on the Indian Child Welfare Act. If I know we've talked about this on a provider level and with the department in the past. Just sounds like there's some folks out there, and I do think that's an important topic for us to address. Nikki, that might be you too. Sorry, we're leaning on you heavy.
No, I'll start, and then I'm sure Jeff and Dennis have other things to say. But so with the Indian Child Welfare Act, is really about keeping children within their families at a higher, if at all possible, in Native American families. But then when they do come into care, we have Child and Family Services has a higher level of burden of proof to be able to remove a child from Indian child from their family. But we also then are mandated to really work on placing them in a kinship home or a tribal home of that tribe, and if not, just a tribal home. So there's placement requirements under the Act and a higher burden of proof for removal and legal process through that. How it really interacts with Families First is obviously they're two separate acts, but the idea of prevention, it goes across all spectrums. So it's not specific to any one race, gender, creed, whatever. It's, about how do we keep all children in their home. So it is really about enhancing prevention services for all families as far as regardless of that. So that the acts are separate, but Families First really is about helping support all kids maintaining in their home if at all possible and enhancing those prevention services. Obviously ICWA is extremely complex, so I mean we could talk about that I'm sure for the whole time, but I don't know if that gets at what the question is just how the two acts interact or kind of run parallel to each other.
Thanks. I think that gets at Dennis or Jeff. Is there anything you guys want to add to that? Or?
Well, the only thing I would add as a practical application is through our foster care program, we really believe that the kinship opportunity is a viable option and probably sometimes the best because it keeps that child closer to the biological natural family, which is a better transition back to that family if that were ever to be an opportunity. So we see that as a growing need and a more important need that we address as an agency.
Thanks. Jeff, this next one's for you. You alluded to helping children finding a new way of belonging with others that may not be direct family members. Could you expand on that process, what it looks like, who may it entail in terms of who is part of this new family? And then I bet both Dennis and Nikki would probably have some things to add to that as well from their perspectives, because I think we're all working on that. So.
You bet. So I use the word, I think, web of belonging, and I think it's just steeped in the idea of permanency, and that we do have to recognize, because, and I think sometimes we start to talk about all the kids as being kids that, you know, that their family of origin isn't necessarily the family they're going to live with. Their biological family is not available or capable, or for whatever reason, going to be there. Montana has, Nikki, you might have to help me with the language of this a little bit, but we have what's called our fictive kin policy in Montana, which is actually very progressive and very liberal. So it's really anyone that, I think we use the word ascribes and kind of fills a family role, can be identified as a person kind of as being involved in as a part of that family. So when I talk about family search and family find, those are some words that folks, you can Google. Family find especially. There's some toolkits out there. There's some people that are doing this very well across the country. It takes a significant amount of work. It requires sitting down individually with kids and talking about everyone who's been involved with them through their lives, and who means something, and where siblings are. What people are finding in different parts of the country are that people have siblings that they never knew they had. Sometimes they're older siblings and adult siblings. And it takes literally hours and hours of sitting down and reviewing, building a family tree, building memory with kids of different places and people, and then reaching out and seeing, you know, without building hopes for kids and giving them unreasonable hopes that, oh gosh, this person's, you know, your second grade math teacher is perfect. That's going to be your new dad. We know that's not how that works, but we can reach out to that second grade math teacher prior to saying this is a great idea to the kid, because we don't know anything about them, and start to create this web of belonging. So I think this is something that anytime a child's removed from home and we hear ourselves saying discharge plan or the likelihood to return to home is slim, probably anytime we start termination proceedings, we ought to be thinking about this with kids. And there are very formalized structures. People can go to the University of Montana Center for Children and Families website. We have some resources. If you go to, it's health.umt.edu, health.umt.edu, and it's put in search, put family search in our search box. And we've written some stuff about it, and and it's full of resources. Actually, it's one of those pieces that's, that if you want to dig deeper, it'll give you 10, 20 things across the country to read about people, things they're doing.
Great, thanks. Nikki, Dennis, any adds to that, or are you guys good?
Well, I would just say I appreciate Jeff's perspective, especially his perspective on that time intensity of making those kinds of matches and considerations, because it is, and you want it to be right, and who knows what kind of fit it will be from the get-go as you, as a provider, research that child's history and background and lineage, if you will, to discover a potential permanent or permanency for that child that may not ever have that opportunity to return to the biological family.
I would just briefly add that I do think we've been pretty conscious about, with all the interest and hype around families first and prevention, to not forget that there are still kids in foster care that need that permanent home, and how do we achieve that? And not only that permanent home, but permanent connections. So there historically in child welfare has really been this push that it had to be a placement, where really what we know is as long as kids, as they grow older within the foster care system, if they can't find a permanent home, having permanent connections that they can utilize and provide support for them really does improve their outcomes for them also. So to have it kind of twofold, that we want to continually, as Jeff talked about, doing that family find and digging deep into families, family and friends that support kids, but also making sure that we can just surround the youth with as many supportive people, regardless of the placement type.
Thanks, Nikki. Next question, and this one's getting a lot of votes, and I think it's a great one. When a child is removed from the home, there's going to be trauma. So why aren't all placements a therapeutic foster care placement? Wouldn't that be better for children if all foster parents had that extra training and the situation were approached therapeutically?
Yeah, I'd love to start with that one, only because I think the therapeutic foster care title is more of a title. I know some foster parents that were never a therapeutic foster parent that have done amazing work. They approach everything therapeutically and have maintained many different kids in their home with all sorts of behaviors. One thing that I will say, that where I see where good foster parents, have skills, is experience. You have to have, multiple children coming through your home with multiple different behaviors, and are able to build resources and capacity within themselves to have that support. So absolutely agree that we want our foster parents to be as highly trained, all foster parents, therapeutic or non-therapeutic, to be highly trained and have lots of experience and really have the supports necessary. We have piloted some different models over the years around really bringing the services to the child versus changing placement types, right? So whether you're in a regular foster home or a therapeutic foster home, that you can increase services and based on the needs of the child and not based on a licensing type. And so I do think I'm excited for us to kind of get into that work of really how do we improve the supports to foster parents, whether it's a therapeutic foster parent and or a non-therapeutic foster parent.
Just being a provider of therapeutic foster care, I couldn't agree more with Nikki about her analysis of, it's not necessarily the title of the foster family that really makes a difference. It's, it's how they support that child and their needs. As part of it's foster care case management, getting the kids what they need when they need it, not necessarily delivering therapy within the home. And we would never do that, of course, but that's kind of a misperception, I believe, that that's what happens. It's not necessarily that. It's understanding the child's need and that understanding trauma-informed care.
Thanks, Dennis. We're kind of wrapping up. I want to be respectful of the participants' time and the panelists' time here. We've got just a couple of minutes left. And this is usually the time in this conference where we move into a bit of an action plan. There are a couple of questions that are remaining out there, but I think they lean towards this. The questions that are still on the board out there have to do with basically how do we share the information about what that training is available out there for EBPs, or how do we do a better job of sharing maybe in the cost? So there's a suggestion about utilizing BAM as a coordinator, the Behavioral Health Alliance of Montana, and or maintaining information on those evidence-based practices so we can share costs across agency. There's a question about what are some EBPs residential centers are using. Wondering, and if participants out there have other things I'd like to see an action plan for, please put it in the chat right now. But you guys have ideas about how we could move that forward, how we could keep this discussion going, how we can share these resources. Jeff, you brought up the website, and I think that's an important one. And I think we could probably spend an hour sometime just going through some of those resources and you talking about that. And maybe that's something we want to do, if you'd be willing to do that. But any of the rest of you, any other thoughts or ideas about how we continue to share this information moving forward?
In my initial kind of comments, it was breaking down silos between agencies, and that's a big part of it. And I think we have some work to do in coordination amongst each other, but really truly sit down and set a plan for, okay, let's share this cost. Let's aggregate all of us together to, get training that can become less expensive if we share it. and that kind of thing. And I think that's really necessary. And you mentioned it, Mike. BAM is a great resource for that and a potential connector to all of our agencies across the state. And I know you and I have sat down and had that exact chat, that in your mind and your vision is that we come together, share resources, coordinate things that we can collectively tackle together. It costs us less. We're all better off for that effort. And, you know, but yet right now that's still a challenge that's in front of us.
Jeff, you look like you're wanting to jump in there.
Now I'm unmuted. I would encourage folks to reach out to the center, and I don't know, maybe Tyson, you could post. I was just trying to see if I could. We can't chat. We can't Q&A. We can only chat, which doesn't get out. But I would encourage people to reach out to the center. I think we need to really push and look for actionable innovations. So this topic I've talked about today around family voice curious and engagement and family search is all good and well, except for, and I think that question, the spirit of the question that I got was, but what do we do? What are the action steps? There's some stuff if you go to that website that you'll see. And then I would also just encourage you to reach out to us. We have a grant making shop that can help you find funds to help your agency or organization or yourself try innovative ways to step into changing how we work with families. I think that each one of us and all of us as participants in something like this need to find a way and to find one step or one thing or one part of this way of elevating the experience of lived experience and voice of families. And if we can find one way, one innovative thing, and move that forward, in this case, that would be 60 things that would be happening.
Jeff, what's that website? And I'll throw it up for everybody right now, actually.
It's health, HEALTH.umt.edu/CCFWD.
All right.
So anything we could do to help folks take an action step, we're in.
We'll get that out to folks as well. Nikki, anything from you on your end?
I would just say thank you very much for letting me participate in this. It's a great experience, and that just really appreciated the providers' willingness to come to the table and have conversations. So as other ideas and issues come up, definitely willing to be, hear what's going on and be part of the solutions. I do know that we've talked about therapeutic foster care off and on through the years, and at some point I do think a good action step would be, really looking at therapeutic foster care and regular foster care and how we enhance those supports. Currently we have some internal projects going on around foster care, how to enhance foster care support to foster parents, and how to do that at the therapeutic level also.
So part of what I'll offer from YBGR's standpoint, that if any of you have the desire to have these conversations move forward, we'll provide the platform, right? We can do these kind of webinars. Jeff, if you're willing to sit down, we can send out a message for folks and say, hey, you want to know about these resources? We'll have another one of these lunchtime conversations and let people join in and we can talk more. Nikki, if you want to say, how do we get more people talking about therapeutic foster care, we can put those folks, or foster care in general, we can put them together in a room. We'd love to do that kind of thing, and it's really not hard. And if folks out there on the participants would like to be a part of that, please let us know. You can throw that information up in the chat box right now or send us an email and we'll follow up there. You can go right through our website, the YBGR Connect, and at any time throw an idea up there and we'll work on this. But thank you guys very much for your time. Appreciate the panelists. It was a great discussion, and hopefully the participants got something out of it and the virtual format was manageable for everybody. So thank you guys very, very much. Have a great day.
Mike, you did a great job as a DJ talk show host. Good work.
Yeah, I won't break out my beatbox now. So you guys take care. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.